Hello children, today we are going to take up the first lesson of our class 12th English from the textbook Flamingo. The short story is the last lesson written by Alphonse Doudet. This is a wonderful short story and we are going to discuss this short story, and I'll give you a brief outline of the story, and then afterwards I expect you to read the story from the textbook of Flamingo of class 12th. First of all, let us try to understand the background of this story. This story was written by Alphonse Doudet, a French novelist, against the backdrop of Franco-Prussian War, the war that took place between Prussia and France. Prussia, presently Germany, and under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, the man who was known as Blood and Iron, unified Germany by waging wars against neighboring countries, France, Italy, etc., etc. So this story was written against the backdrop of Franco-Prussian War. The aftermath of this war was two districts of France were taken over by the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. These two districts belonged to France, and the majority of the people in these two districts are French-speaking people. Having won over the war, the Prussians wanted to impose their own language onto the people of these two districts, whose native language is French. So, the theme of this story can as well be understood is language imposition and language loyalty. Language is an emotional issue. Language is not merely a tool for communication. It also involves cultural aspects. So on one hand, the Prussians wanted to impose their own language onto the people of these two districts. These two districts are Alsace and Lorraine. This story took place in the district of Alsace, and the action of this story takes place in a school. The setting of the story is a school in the district of Alsace, and the theme of the story is language imposition and language loyalty. Certain issues are raised through this story. The issue of linguistic chauvinism and cultural hegemony of the colonial or the imperial powers, and their lust for controlling the world and influencing their cultures is also touched in this particular short story written by Alphonse Daudet. It also speaks about the absurdity of the people, so-called victors, in imposing their own language and their own culture on a community merely because they won over them. We have to read and we have to understand this particular story against the backdrop of this. What will happen to the people, how they feel when a particular language is imposed on them, when their own language, when their own mother tongue is taken away and another language is imposed on them. That is what is dealt. How do they feel? That is what is very beautifully dealt by the short story writer Alphonse Doudet. This is what the background of the story. We need to understand this story happened in a district called Alsace, which originally belonged to France, and after the war it was taken over by the Prussians, and the Prussians are going to impose their own language, German language, onto the people of France. This is what the background of the story. Now let us come to the plot of the story, the outline story I am going to give you, so that it is going to help you to understand the story when you read it for yourself. The central character in this story is a schoolboy. His name is Franz. He is just like all the other schoolboys. He is a truant. He doesn't want to go to his school. He wants to bunk the classes as and when possible. He is just like all the other schoolboys. Every schoolboy can find himself or herself in France. The name of this boy is Franz. The story begins when this schoolboy was on his way to school. He was scared. He was in a great dread because he was already late to the school. He started late, and particularly as the other schoolboys, he was very much scared of the teacher. In this story, his teacher is Mr. M. Hamel. He is a language teacher and he teaches French. He was in a great dread when he started to school because he was already late and he did not prepare for the homework that was given by his teacher, Mr. Hamel. This teacher asked him to come prepared for a lesson in grammar, that is French grammar, participles. Like all the other boys, he did not prepare anything for this grammar lesson. So there are two reasons for his fear. He was already late and he did not prepare anything that was given by his teacher, language teacher. When he was going to school, he saw many things. All those things were quite attractive for this boy. He saw birds' eggs. He saw Prussian soldiers drilling, and there were other attractions as well for him. and he wanted to bunk the school. He did not want to attend the school that day. But finally, he made up his mind. He controlled himself and decided to go to school. When he was on his way to school, he passed the town hall. Just like a community hall, there was a notice board, bulletin board, where all the notices were kept. And there was a big crowd of people before the notice board. He started thinking about what might be the notice that might be kept in the bulletin board, before which there was a big crowd of people. He knew that most of the bad news were coming from that bulletin board only. The news of lost battles, the news of the draft that is going to come, and all the other pieces of bad news were coming from the bulletin board only. When he saw a big group of people, he started thinking what might be the bad news about. As he was already late, he hurried, and when he was going in a hurry to his school, there were a few people whom he knew who were there before the notice board of the community hall, town hall. So, blacksmith watcher was one among them. He was with his apprentice. Then he was reading the notice that was put in the notice board. When he saw this boy going in a hurry, he made fun of him, and the boy did not mind it, and he was going to his school. He was late. He was going to his school, and when he was going to his school, he could understand that the school would be like all the other days. He thought that there would be a lot of noise, and he thought that there would be a great din and bustle in the school, opening and closing of desks, and all the children repeating lessons in unison, and the teacher would be making rounds, rapping the ruler on the tables. This is what he thought, the atmosphere that would be there at the school. But when he was at a distance from the school, there was nothing like that. There was no noise. There was no din and bustle. The school was very silent, as if it was a Sunday. And all the children, he could see, all the children already occupying their places in the class. This he could see from the window. And he could also see his teacher, M. Hamel, with a ruler in his hand. Then he was very much surprised. He had a plan in his mind. When the school would be in a great noise, he would sneak into the class without being noticed by anybody. That was the plan that he had. And when he saw the school totally silent, his plan could not work out. So he was supposed to enter the class. So he opened the door of his classroom When he opened the door of his classroom, everybody was looking at him. It was embarrassing for him, a little insulting for him, because everybody was watching him, including his teacher. He was in a great tension. He was excited. He was nervous as well, because he was supposed to enter his own class when everybody's eyes were set on him. He thought that his teacher would be angry. He would shout at him. Probably he would beat him. But nothing of that sort happened when he opened the door. M. Hamel spoke to him very kindly and asked him to enter the class. He said, "We were beginning without you, Mr. Hamel." This is what Mr. Hamel told little Franz. "We were beginning without you," in a kind voice. Very surprising for this boy, very unexpected for this boy. So when the teacher spoke to him in a kind voice, he jumped over the bench and sat down at his own desk. He was very much excited. He was very much nervous because of everything that was surprising about the school on that day. So when he got over his own fright, his own nervousness, then he observed the class. He looked at the teacher. Then he could understand that the teacher was specially dressed. Unlike the other days, he was putting on a beautiful green coat, frilled hat, a special dress which he put on generally on prize days and inspection days, just like our annual day function. He put on the dress which he puts on special days, just like annual days and school inspection days. This was something special he noticed about the teacher. And the whole class seemed to be very strange, because the whole class was very, very silent, very, very serious and solemn. Among all these surprising things, the most surprising thing for this kid was some of the village elders, old mayor, old postmaster, old houser, all the village elders were occupying the back benches. And some of them holding their books, sitting very seriously with their books open. Normally that doesn't happen. This was the most surprising thing for him on that day. Village elders occupying back benches and sitting in the class where generally kids sit. And all of them were very serious. They were opening their books and seriously trying to read their French books. Everything was surprising for this boy Franz. All the changes, he was very much surprised. He was confused. When he was in such a great startlement, the teacher, M. Hamel, was very serious. He mounted his chair and in a serious voice but gentle, he made an announcement. My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. My dear children, I want you to be very attentive. This was the announcement that was made by M. Hamel very seriously, but in a gentle voice. That announcement, when it was made by the teacher, saying that it was the last French lesson, and from the next day onwards, German would be taught in all the schools of both Alsace and Lorraine districts, made this boy very much surprised. It was just like a thunderbolt, a bolt from the blue for this small boy. It brought about a sea change in the attitude of this boy towards his school, towards his studies, towards his subjects, and towards his teacher. So far, he was a careless boy, he was a negligent boy, he was not so serious about his studies, he never bothered to learn his language, he always postponed learning, and scanty respect for his teacher. So when the teacher made this announcement, there was a U-turn in the attitude of this boy, in the thinking of this boy towards his mother tongue, French. He started thinking that he was never serious about his language. He could not learn much because he was negligent, and the learning of his language would come to an end. He felt very sorry for being a truant, for bunking the classes, and for going in search of birds' eggs and other entertainments at the cost of his classes. All his books appeared very dear. He was very much attached. All of a sudden, after the announcement, he became very much attached to the books. Earlier, he used to think that his books were nuisance, heavy to carry, a burden. Now, he was very much attached. He thought that his history books, the history of saints, were his close friends. He started hugging those books. And when he thought of his teacher, even though he was very strict, he was a disciplinarian, he felt some kind of pity for the teacher. He felt sorry for his teacher. Earlier, he never felt sorry for the teacher because he used to give punishments. He was very strict, particularly with the ruler. Even though he was cranky, he felt very sorry for the teacher because it was the last class and he was supposed to go the next day, leaving his own motherland. He felt really sorry for the teacher And he could understand the reason behind so many changes, so many surprises that were there in the class. He could also understand why the teacher was in a special dress, because it was the honor of his last lesson. It was in the honor of his last lesson. It was because of his love towards his own language. He came to school in a special dress on that day. And he could also understand why the villagers were sitting, occupying the back benches. It was because they were very sorry. They could not go to school. It was their way of thanking M. Hamel for 40 years of faithful service to the community, teaching French language. He has put in 40 years of service in that district, and that district is no longer his own district, because he was supposed to go from that district. And in that district, only German would be taught from the next day onwards. He was thinking about all those things, and there was a sea change in the attitude of this boy. When he was thinking about all those things, his teacher called his name, and his teacher M. Hamel asked him to recite the rule for participles, which he asked him to come prepared. But this boy was not prepared. This Franz never took his homework very seriously like all the other boys. When he was asked to recite the rule for participles, he could not recite. He fumbled and he felt very sorry. For the first time, he felt very sorry for not coming prepared to the class. When he got mixed up, when he was supposed to recite this rule, when he got mixed up, he felt really sorry, genuinely sorry, which he never did earlier. And he felt really ashamed of himself. His head was hung in shame, and he did not have the courage to look up. Then his teacher told him in a kind voice, and he said that he would not scold. He would not scold Franz. He said, he also added that he should feel bad enough. And the teacher, blamed everybody, including himself, for the children not learning their own mother tongue, this French here. He held everybody responsible for the children neglecting French. First, he criticized or blamed the parents for sending the children for the farm work. And he also blamed himself, taking his teaching very lightly. Whenever he wanted to go for fishing, he declared a holiday. And whenever he wanted children for attending his garden work, he gave a holiday for the class and sent the children for gardening work. He blamed everybody. He also blamed himself for the children not learning French. Then he started speaking from one to other. The teacher started speaking gloriously about French language. He said that it was the most beautiful language, the clearest and the most logical among the languages of the world. And he asked the students to protect their own language. And he said that when a community is imprisoned, as long as they protect their language, safeguard their language, it is as if they have the key of their prison in their hands. That means as long as they safeguard their language, whenever they want to come out of the prison, they can do so. That's what he said. When he told so many things about the language, all the time, Franz was listening very attentively, and he opened the grammar book and the teacher M. Hamel started teaching grammar. When he started teaching grammar, Franz was very attentive. He was listening with rapt attention. When he started listening, when the teacher was teaching grammar lesson, he could understand everything. Every syllable he could understand. Every point he could understand about the grammar lesson that was taught, French grammar lesson. He could understand that French was very easy. And he could also understand why it was quite easy for him, because he listened with rapt attention, which he never did earlier. And the teacher also took extra pains to teach him that day. All these things made that grammar lesson very easy. And the teacher wanted to give away everything about French language before he goes out of that school. Everything he wanted to put in one stroke. Then, after grammar, the teacher had a lesson in writing. The teacher, M. Hamel, took out new copybooks which he kept there in his rack. He opened the rack and took all the copybooks and distributed to all the students. And he asked them to write in the copybooks. There was an atmosphere of patriotism. All the students were very silent. Even small kids were also totally silent. They were engrossed in writing. When they were so silent, the pigeons that were there on the roof started cooing. When the pigeons started cooing, Franz began to think whether the Germans would make these pigeons coo in German from the next day onwards. This is what he started thinking. This shows how breathless he was, how inconvenient he felt when his language was forcibly taken from him. This shows his mindset on that day. When he was writing along with the other students, he lifted his head and looked towards his teacher. His teacher, M. Hamel, was very serious, and the teacher was sitting motionless on his chair. He was gauging at each and everything of the school. He wanted to fix everything that was there in the classroom in his mind of minds, because he was going from that school where he served for more than 40 years. He rendered valuable services for 40 years, and he had a garden in front of the class. He looked after that garden, and having served there for 40 years, he was forcibly sent from that place, from his own country. And above the class, his own sister was packing all the things. She was moving the trunks. He could listen. He could hear the noise of trunks being moved by his own sister. His heart was almost broken. He was very sad. He was heartbroken to leave the school wherein he served for 40 years, the district which would not be his own district from the next day onwards. So finally, M. Hamel controlled his emotions, even though the situation was quite emotional. He completed the class to the very last on that day. After writing, they had a class on history, and children were asked to repeat the letters of the alphabet, and when everybody was repeating in unison, Franz Oldhauser, this old man who could not go to school for a long time, who was also there in the back bench, he opened his French primer, and along with small kids, he was also repeating in unison along with the small kids. And when he opened his primer and joined the other students repeating the lesson with tears in his eyes, it was a sight to see. Never it happened, and Franz also became quite emotional. All of them were crying, all of them were shedding tears. And when such an old man is shedding tears, he felt, and he wanted to laugh, he wanted to cry. That's how he could remember everything of that last lesson. Everything of that last lesson was imprinted in his mind. He could remember each and everything about the last lesson by M. Hamel. And after that, the church clock struck 12, and the trumpets of the drilling Prussian soldiers returning from the drill was heard, and M. Hamel, towards the end of this class, it was the closing time for the class, he stood up. He was very pale, but he was very confident. Even though he was very pale and emotional, finally he got up very confidently and he said, "My friends, I up to that He was confident, but emotion choked his throat. He could not speak further. Intense emotion blocked his throat and he could not speak further. Then, hiding his tears, hiding his emotion, he turned towards the backboard. He took a piece of chalk. His hands were shivering. He was trying to control his emotions. With all his strength, he held that small piece of chalk and turning towards the backboard, leaning towards the blackboard, he wrote in very big capital letters, Vive la France. That is what he wrote in a big jagged letters on the blackboard. In French, he wrote this sentence, Vive la France. That means, long live France. That is what he wrote. And he could not control his emotions. And then he stopped, leaned against the wall, and without speaking a word, he made a gesture. He could not speak further. He made a gesture saying that the class was over. The school is dismissed. All the students could go. This is what the last lesson by Alphonse Doudet. And this boy, Franz, could remember everything about the last lesson by M. Hamel, his teacher. That is the end of the story. My dear students, you have the textbooks with you. You read the story. You'll enjoy the story. It takes only half an hour to read the story, half an hour to 1 hour. Carefully read the story. In our next class, we'll discuss various issues that are there in the story. I'll also give you certain assignments so that you can write answers to these assignments on a piece of paper and you can send them to me. I would like to have a glance at them. Thank you. Have a nice day.